We are done with reading in this class now. So now comes the fun part, all the writing. All right, fun times. But I'm hoping maybe this third short paper will perhaps give you guys some ideas. I have sent back, it's going to work this way for the online class too. I see that Kira's here with us. It's going to work. I'm going to be sending the papers back for the online class today too. I'm done with them. I just need to mail them back. But you guys all got your first and second short paper back today. For the most part, for the in-person class here, all of you did well. I don't think anybody got below a B on any of them, if I recall. If you got a B on one of them or something, feel free to revise it and send it back to me. I'll be happy to regrade it. Okay. So
I just went and checked my grades on Blackboard, and I haven't gotten my first. I know I should have brought this up earlier, but I have not gotten my first short paper.
I emailed
Oh, you emailed it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll upload it there later too, but just to get it back to you before class, I emailed it rather than having to log in through 3 different hoops. Figured I would just email it to you today. I still need to get your second short paper back, Nicole, since I had some trouble opening it, but you sent it to me again, so I should be able to get that to you soon. Yeah, all of you did well for the most part. I'm just going to say this too for my other class, because I'll probably upload this video for my other class as well. You know, a lot of the problems with those short papers, you always want to avoid summarizing, right? You need to assume that your audience knows the text inside and out. So ways to avoid summarizing usually involve, practicing good argumentative writing techniques. So remember, you always want to have a strong thesis near the beginning. So the good thing about these prompts is I always give a question that you can come up with an answer to. So actually coming up with a thesis shouldn't be too difficult. Right? I believe that Victor Frankenstein is the true monster of the novel, not the creature. Right? Why? Right? If you can come up with like 3 or 4 different reasons for why you think Frankenstein is the monster rather than his creature, list them up front in the thesis. Then once you get to the body of the paper, you can then kind of dive point to point to point. And that way you avoid summarizing the text. Okay, so sometimes I always say quote the text, right? Quote the text. The text is always your main point of evidence. But don't just quote the text just for the sake of quoting the text, right? Make sure that it always has some sort of point to your argument. Let's say that you're talking about how Frankenstein is the monster, not the creature. Well, maybe you could, cite a passage somewhere, right, that signifies that. So, avoid summarizing. If there's any summary in here, maybe in like the paragraph, you can kind of anchor us where in what passage in the story you're talking about. But other than that, I don't need to know the fine plot details about what happens in the stories. Okay, so just keep that in mind if you choose to revise any of these 2 short papers. So, of course, the first short paper was on the short fiction. The second one was on Frankenstein. So keep that in mind. So what other problems that were there? Sometimes there's problems with like paragraphing. Right? Sometimes people write like 2-page long paragraphs, right? Don't ever do that. Always break it up, right? Whenever like you might change an idea or something of that nature, break it up, right? Don't nothing makes me nothing makes me want to beat my head against the wall more than reading a 2-page long paragraph. I just don't have that good of an attention span. It's not good writing to do that. Okay. Like we talked in our movie class about long films, right? How sometimes they're too much for audiences. Well, I can definitely tell you, too long paragraphs are too much for this audience. So the key, as always, is strong thesis writing. Get a good thesis. While some argue blank, I argue blank because 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, the classic formula that I've taught you guys over and over. And then back that up with your evidence in the paper. Avoid summarizing. If you can do that, if you can do a good paper like that in 3 or 4 pages, it's more than likely you're going to get an A. Some of you guys have trouble with grammar too, comma splices, run-ons, as always, or an epidemic, right? Doesn't no matter how many times I teach comma splices and run-ons, people were still going to make the mistakes. So it's just how it is. You only learn to fix those mistakes by making the mistake and then fixing it. Right? So if you had a lot of comma splices and run-ons, you can go patch those up. Always avoid the second person in formal academic writing. I don't want to see any yous directly addressing the reader in formal academic writing. That's a big no-no. I told you guys before, the first person is fine. Some teachers will tell you the first person's not fine, but as far as I'm concerned, the first person's fine. And the third person's fine, but don't use the second person. That's the big rule. I think that's a pretty universal rule that applies to almost any class. What else? Sentence fragments were sometimes issues too, right? So if you have problems with sentence fragments, remember that you need a subject and a verb in your sentence. Sometimes if you start a sentence out with an ing word, like traveling to the fort. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. Traveling to the fort, period. That's not a sentence because you don't have a subject. So a good way to always fix that is just say, Jeff travels or traveled to the fort. You always need a subject with the verb. I don't like to see ing verbs anyway. Anytime you have an ing verb, you can probably better express it. Because usually ing verbs need to have a helper verb with them. Like is preparing, right? Just say prepares or prepared. Is going, just say went, right? So anytime you have these words with a helping verb, anytime you have a helping verb, am, is, are, was, were, with the ing word, you can always just cut that out and just put the actual verb, right? Those ing words are nothing but clutter, and they sometimes cause you to make sentence fragment mistakes too. So avoid those at all costs. Then, of course, as always, format your papers right. Use proper MLE formatting. This is English 102, so that should go without saying at this point. I've given you a template for you to be able to do it. So there's no excuse there if you don't have the formatting right. I've given you the template. So after reading the papers, that's mostly what I had on my mind as far as things you can go back and fix. If you do go back and fix them, what I want you to do is let me me just share a document real quick. I'm getting ready to pull up the prompt, so I will show you how I want you to revise by looking at this prompt. Let's see. So let's see here. So this is a Word document. This is what I'm getting ready. I'm adapting this from a previous syllabus here. This is a Word document. Okay. So if you go back and revise your papers, so let's say you do something like add a new paragraph in, right? Maybe you add a paragraph, or maybe you add textual support for your argument. Sometimes people will also, something else I should have mentioned, sometimes people had good claims, but they didn't have any textual support to back it up. So maybe you want to add textual support, or maybe you're adding a topic sentence in to anchor back to your thesis. Whatever the case is, if you add new content to the paper, what I want you to do when you turn it in again is highlight your new comment and then go and add a comment bubble. You might say, added some textual support here. So point to me in the paper where you've made content changes if you choose to revise. Okay, point to me in the paper where you've made content changes. Because I'm not going to read these word for word again. There's just not enough time, and frankly, I'm teaching so many freaking classes anyway, there's not enough time for me to go back and read all these again carefully. So I'm leaving the impetus up to you to show me where you've made changes. And then I can kind of compare that with your original and go from there. Okay. Let's say you want to do something like fix a comma splice or a run-on. But you don't have to add a bubble for that. If you wanted to fix a comma splice or something, or a run-on or a sentence fragment, all you have to do for that is highlight it in the paper where you've made a change as far as fixing a grammatical or a typo or something like that. Okay. But add the bubbles for content, highlight for grammar or typos or spelling. Okay. Do that for all the polish you add to the paper. So questions, comments, concerns about any of this stuff that we're discussing at the moment? You guys understand what I mean by add the comment bubbles, just like how I would grade your paper if I did it electronically?
If we don't have access to Word, what could we do? Like if we're using an iPad, maybe, is there a way to add comment bubbles on those? Do you know?
You can download Google Docs as an app on an iPad, and Google Docs has comment feature, I know. And then on Google Docs, you can convert the file to Word.
Okay.
That's what I would recommend to you, Nicole. Let's use Google Docs if you don't have access to Word. Yeah, if you're a Mac or Apple user, stay the hell away from Pages. Pages usually just messes you up. I hate that program with a passion. I hate that program. It's the bane of my existence as an English teacher. All right, so that's probably not even Apple's fault. Microsoft's difficult and won't let you even open a Pages file on a PC, which is really annoying. But I do know the programming and stuff works different, so oftentimes that pages will mess it up. So if you're a Mac user, you don't have access to Word, use Google Docs. All you got to have, Google Docs is completely free. All you got to do to use Google Docs is have a Gmail account. Okay. Sometimes these online classes and stuff are often ran by Google Docs, by Google Classroom and stuff. I know WVU doesn't really do much stuff on Blackboard. They do it all. A lot of people that they're doing on Google. I still do mine on Blackboard because I'm like, why the hell change now? I have to use it through Southern, so I might as well do it Blackboard through them too.
I like Blackboard, but my first experience with like an online formatting at the college that I went to in Virginia, they had a crap. What was it called? Let me check. I still have it on here. It's called I think it's called Canvas, maybe. And I liked it pretty well. And I think the reason it worked out so well is because they provided everybody with iPads, and it was pretty cohesive. But in like a normal setting where that's not optional, they definitely don't work very well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure too, Nicole. If you're mostly using an iPad, I think you can download Microsoft Word for iPad, and your Southern login should give you the credentials to be able to use the program.
I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, so that's an option for you too. Yeah, your Southern credential, you get Microsoft Office for free as part of being a Southern student. So if you log into it with your Southern credentials, I'm pretty sure you can get it for free. All right, that's the same for PowerPoint and Excel and all that. If you need any of that, have you taken speech yet, Nicole? So now getting back to the point at hand, after that digression. This next paper, I say here's I'm pretty much using the same prompt for this and next class. By the way, I'm doing some edits here, but this is an adaptation evaluation, 3 to 5 pages. So this is going to be due the Friday the 23rd. Friday the 23rd. Okay. So let me see here. Yeah, I need to cut this out. But basically, what you're going to be doing for one of these literary texts we've read, so it can be one of the short stories, like the Poe stories, or the Hawthorne story, or the Yellow Wallpaper, or Good Man's Hard to Find, whatever, or Frankenstein, or Dracula, or Haunting of Hill House, right? For any of those texts, you're going to pick an adaptation and pretty much just evaluate the adaptation from the standards of the original text. So, I can sit here and wax about a lot of these different adaptations over the years. This class is a classic Gothic fiction class. So we've read Frankenstein, Dracula, Hill House, all this other stuff. There's no shortage of adaptations for any of these texts that we've read. Right. So The Haunting of Hill House, for instance, right? It has this Netflix show. It has this 1960s movie called The Haunting. It has a 1999 movie called The Haunting. Dracula, God knows how many Dracula movies have been made through the years. Right? Starting with the 30s. The 30s, even before the 30s film, you had the 20s silent film called Nosferatu. Then you had the 30s ones. And then you had Then you had like the rebirth of Dracula, of these types of movies in the 60s, the Hammer horror films starring Christopher Lee as Dracula. Right. Then you have then there's a really great Dracula from the 90s that I've told you about called Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's the one with Anthony Hopkins and Keanu Reeves, and Winona plays Mina in that one. And Gary Oldman's Dracula. I would recommend that one if you want to write about Dracula. That's a good film. Then you had the Dracula Netflix show that just came out last year. For Frankenstein, right? You have the 30s Frankenstein. There was lots of even, you could do the 30s Frankenstein. You could do the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, as well, because that takes a lot of the tropes from the novel. But again, you could do the 60s Frankenstein, right? The Hammer horror ones. Those also have Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. You could do, there was a Frankenstein film made in the 90s with Robert De Niro played the creature, I remember. Tons of different shows about Frankenstein on these streaming services and stuff. I know that The Yellow Wallpaper has an adaptation. I think you can find that on YouTube. There's Poe stories. A lot of these Poe stories have different adaptations. Lots of those they did in this type of like animated feature that was on Netflix. I'll have to get back to you on the name of that. But in the 60s, they made a ton of Poe adaptations starring Vincent Price. I know in our film class, we talked a lot about Vincent Price. But he did a lot of those stories, like Fall of the House of Usher and the Black Cat and things like that. So no shortage of options out there. So my advice would be whichever text it was that interested you the most, whichever one you enjoyed doing the most, you just Google it, find some adaptations, and then pick one that you're interested in doing. Good chance is for this assignment, at least, I've probably seen a lot of these, but not all of them. So you will have to keep that in mind. I just preached about not summarizing a lot, but you will need to do a little bit of summary in this one, just to show the reader how the adaptation is radically different from the original, if at all. Okay. So I'll just ask you guys before I move on in the paper, which text do you think you would want to do an adaptation paper on? I know, Nicole, you probably want to do Hill House, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say I plan on doing Hill House.
The Netflix show.
Yep.
Ryan, you think you'll do a Dracula one since you presented on Dracula?
I say it's very likely.
Very likely. Yeah, like I said, you can do any one you want, but I would definitely recommend either the Netflix 3-episode show or the 99 or the 90s film. I would recommend one of those. Lauren, think you'll probably do Frankenstein? I know Frankenstein seems to be your text.
Most likely. That one's just the one that seemed more interesting to me whenever we read it.
Right. Yeah, the 90s one I would recommend for that one too, called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That's the name of that one. It does a few things differently. I think that would make for an interesting paper. So yeah, there's also a show called Penny Dreadfuls, which that show like weaves all these stories together into one show. So that's a pretty cool show if you want to do something like this. That would require a commitment, I guess. That's a 3-season long show. So that would require more of a commitment unless you've already seen it already. Kira, what show do you think you would want? What text do you think you'd want to do? You didn't read Dracula in my online class. Which one do you think you'd be gravitate to?
I honestly don't know. I don't have any desire to watch Frankenstein, honestly. No desire at all. So I'd probably do like Hill House or something. Just because I already know so many big differences between the two. Yeah.
Right. Or you could do one of the short stories, right? Like if you like Yellow Wallpaper or one of the Poe stories or something like that, that's also a choice for you. Yeah, so it's what you're going to be doing in a nutshell. So I'd read the prompt here. Actually saw a funny TikTok the other day, by the way. It was like English teachers. Like you go to an English teacher and you say, I don't understand the paper. And then they just read the prompt to you, right? So that's what I'm going to do for you today is read the prompt. Right, but your goal is to take one of the texts we have read. So I'm editing this thing as I go. We have read and do some outline viewing of an adaptation of it. For purposes of the scope of the assignment, I think it best to evaluate only one film rather than a sequence of them, as it will be difficult to do justice to more than one film in 3 to 5 pages. Though you could do some type of comparative project for your research paper project. So if you want to cover like different versions of different films, like that might be of one of these texts, that might be a good project for your actual research paper later here in a couple of weeks. So do one adaptation now, but if you like doing adaptations, you can do more than one later if you want. Not for
Well,
this.
if I was thinking of like doing Hill House for the big paper at the end, could I do it for the third short paper, but just like do it differently than how I'm going to do the last one?
So what do you mean here, Nicole? Like,
So the prompt that's up now, is that for the last paper, or is that for the third short paper?
there's 3 short papers, right? So this is the third and final one.
Okay.
But you can take part of this third short paper and add it and adapt it to your research paper if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay. Yeah, any of the short papers we've done in here, you can adapt for your research paper and build on it. I actually encourage that. Build on one of your original papers. You can expand it more. If you want to do a film adaptation, great. But even if you just wanted to like adapt one of your other papers and maybe just give more textual support for it, build it more, that's an option too. So I say here, to do the paper, you will first need to form some criteria from the original literary text for your introduction. What major themes were in the major text? Which theme are you focusing on? I'll put theme with an S here. Which themes are you focusing on in the paper, and what does the adaptation do to either reinforce the themes or perhaps enhance or alter the original ideas from the text? These are questions you need to pose near the beginning of your paper. Your thesis will be put in tension with the original text. You will demonstrate in your thesis what either worked or did not work in relation to the original. Is the adaptation better, worse, maybe on an equal plane? Does the film succeed in doing what it tries to do, albeit differently? Or is it total garbage? these are questions of judgment you'll need to consider here. Let's say, just talking aloud, let's say I know the 90s Dracula film really well, right? That's one of my favorites. Let's say that you wanted to talk about the 90s Dracula film. Well, like, one of the things we talked about when talking about Dracula was sexuality in Dracula, right? Lucy in Dracula, the novel, was painted as this almost virginal, holy type of figure before she's corrupted by Dracula. In the film, she's painted as being like really promiscuous and flirty, stuff like that. What does that do to create a new text, perhaps? But the 90s Dracula makes it a love story too. It sounds kind of corny, but I actually liked it. Like, they give it a reincarnation spin. Like, Dracula lost his lover. That's how he became a vampire, by cursing God or something. So a few centuries later, he discovers that Mina is his lost lover reincarnated. Right, so that adds a different spin to the whole thing. In the Netflix Dracula, Van Helsing, as I said, was a woman. Right? What does that do to add to that character? So whatever differences there are, you can think about what the themes are from the original text. Right. So in Dracula, we've talked a lot about these. We talked about Christianity in Dracula. We talked about sexuality in Dracula. Lots of other. We talked about colonialism in Dracula. I'm just mentioning Dracula because that's the one right off the top of my head, since we just finished talking about it. Frankenstein, nature and nurture, right? Scientific ethics, right? So whatever question text it is you do, you have to ask yourself what themes were in the original, and how does this new adaptation, what does it do with those themes, right? Does it add to them? Does it change it up? Right? Whatever it does it work or not, according to your opinion? This is very much an opinion paper, right? So I'm pretty much asking you to be a film critic here, right? This is purely your opinion on whether this adaptation works or not, according to the standards that's set forth by the original. So in that introduction, then, you kind of have to pose, okay, this is the original. What themes in the original are you going to talk about? And then what does the adaptation do with those themes? Do you think the adaptation works? So that's pretty much what you got to sort of set out doing early on. And then in the body of the paper, this is when you take the criteria from the original, you pose in the beginning and apply it to the film. The body paragraphs will take the criteria from the text and put these criteria in tension with the adaptation. In doing so, you should incorporate specific evidence from various scenes from the films in conjunction with textual support. Demonstrate based on your aesthetic judgment what works and what doesn't. Do not just ramble on about your opinion. Do ground your analysis in the texts. So by text, I mean novel or short story and film. So let's say you wanted to talk about that point about Lucy, right, being promiscuous in the 90s version. Right? How does that work in comparison with the original novel? Is that a change for the better or for the worse, in your opinion? Or the love story thing I just mentioned, right? Does that change the original text from the better or for the worse? In the original novel, Dracula is just a monster. He has no sympathetic qualities. Well, what does adding a sympathetic quality to Dracula do to the original in comparison with the original novel? Do you think that works or not? So this is all purely your opinion, guys. You just have to kind of set out, you just kind of have to set the criteria out what works in the original. And does this new version of it, does that work too or not? I do have some examples that I can give you. I haven't taught this assignment in 5 or 6 years, so I'm kind of excited for it. But I did give this assignment once before. I got some good papers out of it. So, yeah, I will dig through my archives and try to come up with some examples for you to read, just to show you how this stuff works. Some of these films are available via streaming. I just now discussed some examples in class, as I said. You just kind of got to hunt around. You might find some of these on YouTube. But if you have Netflix or something, you probably shouldn't have any problem finding at least one thing to do, or Amazon or HBO or whatever. I don't know what all of you guys' situations are with that, but you could always just rent the movie too, $3 or $4. Right. And then I say here that's due Friday the 23rd, 11:59 on Blackboard. And then standard stuff applies. You're going to use MLA formatting, and no need for a works cited page since you're not looking up sources. The only paper in the class you're looking up sources for is the final paper. So this is all purely your opinion. Does this adaptation work or not? What worked about the original text or what didn't work about the original text? You might make the argument that the adaptation's better. Right? That's very we're not setting out these original texts like there's some kind of gold standard. Right? You actually might like the adaptation better than the original text. That oftentimes happens. I told you guys before in the film class, I think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the film, is better than the book. So it does. That's my opinion. Lots of people disagree with me, but it sometimes happens that the movie is better than the book. So, what worked or didn't about the original? What works or doesn't work about the adaptation in relation to the original? If you can answer those two questions, you'll do good on this paper. Okay. Then just ignore this part. This is for next class. So questions, comments, concerns, anything at all that I can address about the writing of this paper? Does it make sense? Is there anything here that you're like, what the heck is he talking about? You guys feel pretty good? Should I take the silence as an affirmation?
I can't think of any questions.
Yeah, me either. I think everything is pretty clear.
Okay, very good. So I will, let's kind of we have a few minutes. Let's outline out what this thing will look like. We'll sketch us an outline here. Outline. In your intro, you probably probably do something like introduce the adaptation you're doing. What themes from the adaptation are at stake? Then your thesis is, does the adaptation work with these themes? Why or why not? List 3 or 4 reasons. Right, so your thesis statement for this is pretty much going to be, this adaptation's great, or this adaptation's average, or this adaptation completely sucks. All right, here's why. 3 or 4 reasons. Okay, and that should be pretty. No, that's just purely your opinion. So when I say reasons, I should say criteria in relation to the original. Let's say you were talking about Dracula again, right? Maybe you wanted to talk about sexuality, right? Maybe you want to talk about religion and salvation and stuff like that. Maybe you would want to talk about the definitions and rules about what makes a vampire, right? That would be fun. So, these reasons that you're coming up with are purely reasons that you're interested in from the original text. Simple as that. We've had all these conversations about these books. So whatever interested you, run with it. Then your body paragraphs. Criteria 1. Get a topic sentence anchoring us back to the thesis. So you remember the topic sentences, you pretty much repeat what you already said in your thesis statement. That helps anchor you in the text, or that helps anchor the paper. That way you don't lose your focus, I should say. Discuss differences between adaptation and original or your particular criteria. Some brief summary will be part of that there. And then evaluate. Do you think this adaptation works with this criteria? Does it make it better? Is the adaptation better? Worse? Why or why not? And then whatever your second and third criterias are, pretty much repeat, rinse and repeat here. Except this time, except as you further on you go through the paper, you'll talk about different criterias. And then basically you conclude, you pretty much just sum up your argument in a nutshell. This is the type of paper where a summary conclusion is appropriate. If you guys remember from English 101, I mentioned that a lot of the papers, a summary conclusion is boring, not to do it. For a paper like this, it's pretty conventional to do a summary conclusion where you just sum up what you've written. So now that I sketched it out for you, does that help? Does that help? Again, you guys didn't have questions a minute ago, but does that help more?
Yeah.
Good. So yeah, I'm doing this assignment. Sometimes I'm not doing it to be a pain in the butt. I just think this is a kind of a fun assignment to do. It's better than answering a dry prompt and just going from there. Right? So it's a fun thing to do in a class like this. So have fun with it. If you want to run an adaptation by me that you should pick, feel free. You don't have time to view 5 or 6 adaptations and then decide which one you like the best, really. So pick wisely. Maybe read some reviews of some of these before you pick. Right? Maybe if an adaptation gets a hilariously bad review, right? Maybe that's worth looking at, right? How is this movie so bad? Or maybe a movie gets positive glowing reviews. Maybe you should be suspicious of that, right? Why did it get such positive glowing reviews? Did that work? So maybe read over some reviews of some of these. That might help you decide which one you want to do. But I did mention several that I think work pretty well. If you want to do Hill House in a short paper, or in a short adaptation, not the Netflix show, I would recommend that 60s one for a really good adaptation, and the 90s one is a hilariously awful adaptation. So if you're interested in Hill House, if you want to do a really bad one, do the 90s. If you want to do a really good one, do the 60s. The 90s one's just completely terrible. Like, it's so bad that I like it, if that makes sense. It's just one of those campy, have a laugh type of movies that you should not take seriously. Sometimes those are fun. Right? So, if there's no further questions or comments, that should be all that we need to cover for today. Next class, we're going to get heavy into the weeds and talking paper again. The big paper. That will do well after this, of course. So we'll get heavy into that. We might actually, I'll cover the big paper again one more time. Then after that, we'll just do a bunch of mini lessons over the next couple of weeks. Like a mini lesson on doing an annotated bibliography. Right? A mini lesson on doing a proposal. Right? So next couple of weeks aren't going to be too strenuous. Right? As far as discussion and stuff goes, it's mostly going to be me talking to you probably the next couple of weeks. So it'll feel more like 101 the next couple of weeks than 102's felt like so far. All right. Without further ado, we will call it at that.